So Adam Davis is our next speaker. He's a scientific support coordinator working with NOAA's Emergency Response Division Scientific Support Team for District 8. And so you've heard from Mike Sands about that massive area of District 8. So he's a scientific support coordinator for that whole plan.
One of them.
One of them.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Missy. Thanks, C. Grant. And thanks to all of you for coming. I see some familiar faces out there. That's always good. And I see some unfamiliar ones out there. And that's better for me because, you know, part of our job really is just about getting the message out, helping people understand the science, helping people understand the roles so that when, God forbid, we have a really bad spill, we're not starting from scratch with everyone. So if you would just humor me a little bit this morning, I'm going to do a little social experiment. So what I'd like you to do is if everybody would please stand up. You're probably relieved to be able to stand up after that delicious breakfast this morning. So think in your head of a number between 1 and 3. Okay? So if you're a number 1, I want you to put your hands like that. Okay? If you're a number 2, I want you to put your hands like this. And if you're a number 3, I want you to put your hands like that. Okay, hang on just 1 second.
So I told my boss I would get a standing ovation for this. I stole that trick from somebody recently.
So feel free to steal it. It's a good one. So again, I work for NOAA. How many folks out there have worked with NOAA before? Okay, great. So, you know, NOAA is this, you know, gigantic science agency. It's the largest federal science agency in the United States, okay? And we do all kinds of science. And I'm not going to talk about all that today. I'm going to talk about a little small group within NOAA that I work for that's dedicated to just spill science and spill science, science support to spills, okay? So I work for the Emergency Response Division, and that's within the Office of Response and Restoration, okay? And I'll talk to you a little bit about what those other groups within the Office of Response and Restoration do, mostly just ERD. And I'm going to start with kind of a little bit of history because we've been around for a while, and I think perspective is, in my experience, is one of the things that's kind of lacking with regards to people's understanding of oil spill science and people's understanding of oil spill response. It didn't all start with deep water, okay? So, sorry, that one got clipped off a little bit, but it says ERD early history, astronauts and oil spill cowboys. So what the heck do astronauts and cowboys have to do with spill response? Well, it started with a gentleman named John Robinson, and he was an engineer for NASA back in the early days of the Apollo mission, which was the mission to send a man to the moon, right? And John worked for NASA as a flight engineer. And for those of you who are not familiar with NASA, the way that NASA works on those missions is everybody works for the flight engineer, right? The team is assembled, they have a great plan, there's lots of training that goes into it, but when they implement the mission, right, something always goes wrong, okay? And what they do is they have a dedicated team there assembled with roles assigned, specialties, knowledge, information, experience, so that they can solve those problems, okay? Well, John left NASA in the early 70s and came over to this new science agency called NOAA. And he kind of took that philosophy with him. And what he did was, he was kind of a brilliant guy. He saw in the early 70s how all of this oil spill exploration was taking place in Alaska, right? It's the big boom of the time, okay? And he thought, wow, we don't really understand much about oil spills. So maybe we ought to have a dedicated team that's available to provide some science. And in order to do so, well, we better start learning about it, okay? And he really thought, you know, here's this pristine environment in Alaska. It would be really horrible if there was a really bad spill up here someday. And he knew it was going to come sooner or later. So he worked really hard to start refining the team that was able to do that. And he got a group of scientists together. And again, nobody was really doing this science at the time, throughout the world. This was just a very small group of people. And then about 2 years after that, after he assembled this initial team, there was a spill down in Chile. Okay, several million gallons went into a remote area. Okay, and there was very little response to it. So John and his team, the oil spill cowboys thing comes from the fact that whenever there was a big spill anywhere in the world, they would jump on a plane and they would go down there and they would study. And this spill, they did very little to clean it up. Okay, so we had an opportunity to study what happens when you don't clean up an oil spill over a long period of time. And I'm sure you can kind of all come to the conclusion that's probably not very good. But what we really understood was how does wet oil weather over time? What are long-term consequences of not doing cleanup? We learned a lot about oil behavior, oil transport, all of those kinds of things. So if you're ever interested in your oil spill history, look up this spill. It's an interesting one. And then about 4 years later in 1976, excuse me, there was another really large spill off of Nantucket. Does everybody know where Nantucket is? Okay, does everybody know where the senators and the congressmen and all those folks in Washington like to go in the summertime with their families, right? So it's a very high profile spill and a large one as well. And what happened with this was the first really large national spill where there was really intense political pressure. And there were lots of folks who sort of came to the table in terms of ideas about what to do, okay, especially science, right? There's lots of science up there. There's holes up there, right? There's lots of oceanographers up there. So John and his team had already kind of been assembled. They had a couple spills under their belt. They learned some good things, and John still had this idea in his head about the flight engineer, the NASA concept. So he went to the Coast Guard and he said, listen, how about instead of you having to hear from all of these different types of people, we'll take this science coordination role from you, okay? Or we'll do it for you, rather, okay? And we'll be that sort of arbiter of the science. We'll coordinate. So they tried it. Worked pretty well. It was pretty successful. Okay, Coast Guard liked it, and a little bit of time goes on, and they formalized the team in 1976. And there's a great book out there that was written by one of the original. He was a contractor that supported the team by the name of Miles Hayes. It's called Black Tides, and it talks about all this early experience. But essentially, this group was composed of marine biologists, okay, so they understood biology, what are the effects of spills. They started to understand the chemistry, right? Oil is very complex chemical groups of thousands of chemicals, right? You gotta have some chemists. And they had some oceanographers as well that were really talking about those transport mechanisms and those big ocean systems and how that relates to oil spills. So then in 78, there was another big spill in France, the Amico Cadiz. And in 79, a little bit closer to home, which a lot of people don't know about, in the Gulf of Mexico, this was the first oil spill, the first well blowout in the Gulf of Mexico that released hundreds of millions of gallons of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. That was a very shallow water blowout down there at the Bay of Campeche. And we learned a lot from that spill. It's kind of funny, a lot of the techniques that they tried to contain that spill early on were the same techniques that we later used during deep water. So forward on to about 10 years later, in 1989, and certainly these weren't the only spills that we worked on in the interim, but these were really the game changers for us. These really large spills, we always learned something really new from. Okay, and Valdez, to credit John, for his forethought to get this team together. He knew sooner or later we're going to have a bad spill in Alaska. And he was right? Covered thousands of miles of shoreline, very remote area, very challenging to respond to. So we learned a lot about having to deal with a very large spill over a large geographic area, okay? And what we really, the big takeaway from this one is sometimes cleanup techniques can be too heavy-handed, okay? Your cleanup can be more damaging in terms of the actions that you take than the oil itself, okay? So there's a fine balance that you have to take, okay? And we learned a lot about that. This high pressure, hot water cleaning that they're doing here, basically you're killing all the biota, right? You're cooking them. Be like if you just put them all on a stove, okay? Well, they don't recover. And so, you know, one of the misconceptions a lot of times is we clean up every little bit of oil. Well, we don't. And there's reasons for that. And the reasons are because we don't want to do what we say is more harm than good. Okay? You'll have to keep me honest on time here. So in 2010, a new paradigm, of course, you know, this was another one. Science from all corners of the globe, literally, on this one. You know, the science teams, they stood up just for individual issues like dispersant, right? Like burning, things of that nature. We're teams of, you know, 20, 30, 100 people, okay? And this took place over, you know, 8 months of the spill, but then it followed on from the spill. And you can see the Montgomery group is still continuing to this day, okay? We're still learning lessons from deep water. And the really big kind of takeaways for me from deep water is all about these political influence and the conspiracy stuff that came out of it, which I thought was really negative. I worked deep water, not for NOAA at the time. And, you know, yeah, it was a horrible spill, but I can tell you there were a lot of very dedicated people that worked that spill tirelessly, you know, 17, 20 hours a day for months at a time. And it wasn't that we didn't have a good plan and we didn't execute, right? It's just that sometimes it's bigger than you can really respond. That's just, you know, the honest truth. But one of the things that happened was this, and I think Mike alluded to it a little bit earlier, was this public misperception that, well, why is BP, why is the person who is responsible for spilling oil also cleaning up the oil? And that kind of led to this, you know, we live in this environment now where people are quick to jump to conclusions that there's something afoot, right? Well, I can assure you there was nothing afoot there, okay? And that the science that BP contributed and the technical resources that they contributed, from my experience, were top notch, okay? Nobody was trying to hide anything from anybody. But you have a system where you have to release information that you know to be true. And sometimes, in the absence of saying something, people come and jump to conclusions, okay? So that's one thing I think we could do better in the future. And the other part is that when spills get really big, political influences tend to dominate and not the science. And that, from my perspective as a scientist, is a bad outcome, okay? So we should really try and avoid that. So what do we do in response now? Well, we say we bring science to the decision makers. Okay, who? Well, I'm not going to ask who. I would just tell you, I wasn't one that said NOAA led oil spill science. I mean, oil spill response early on, right? We don't lead the response, right? The Federal On-Scene Coordinator leads the response. What we do is we bring science to those decision makers so that they can make good decisions, okay? And that involves oil chemistry, what we call resources at risk analysis. We want to know what harm is going to be done. There's specific techniques for shoreline assessment. We've learned a lot for 40 years of cleanup about what works and what doesn't work, okay? NOAA also acts as the Department of Commerce trustee representative. Okay, that means that the marine mammals, National Marine Fisheries Service, endangered species that are marine species, fish, all of those are in the trust of the United States. Somebody has to speak for that resource. So NOAA does that. And we also get involved a lot in consultation. This is a requirement. You know, it's really easier for a private entity to respond to a spill than it would be for the federal government, because we have to play by a lot more rules, follow a lot more paperwork than they do. One of the things that we have to always ensure is that we're in compliance with all federal regulations, okay? That's Endangered Species Act and other things. If you want to see what it is, what kind of scientific support exactly we provide, you can go to response.restoration@noaa.gov and you look up this FOSC's guide. That's what we provide to them. My clicker's not working. There we go. Sorry, I was too generous in my scaling of my slide here. So essentially that says that the ERD is composed of the field team, which is folks like me, the coordinators. There's 13 of us across the country who work in Coast Guard districts, okay? And what we refer to as the home team. And these are these specialists, right? Still that same model that John started. Chemists, biologists, oceanographers, data management folks. Now with the age of computers, we have programmers, right? IT specialists, all of that. And then we have this extended family of contractors, that support us as well. And that includes RPI and LSU. So here's how we're kind of situated. Like I said, there's 13 of us spread around the country. In Coast Guard District 8, there are 3 of us. I have sort of the heartland, and then I have a counterpart in New Orleans, and then one in Texas. And every time I show people this map, they're like, wow, why do you have such a big area? Well, about 40% of our spills occur in Louisiana that we support, okay? And why is that? Well, it's because of oil infrastructure, right? Spills occur where the production is highest, okay? And that's why there's multiple ones in Coast Guard District 8. So real quick, we've got about 5 more minutes, 3 minutes, thank you. When we look at oil spill response, this was John and his group, Gary Dalton, others, framework that they came up with early on. And they said, look, if you have any question during a spill, it kind of falls within one of these 5 categories, right? This is how we bring good science to response. Is if we can have and find good answers to all of these questions as we go around, then we can affect a good response. And so subsequently, we specifically tailored our tools, our products, our services, our software that we provide, our guidelines, all of those kinds of things in these broad categories, okay? And that's the kind of construct that we use for all spill response, small and medium. And this is just sort of a timeline that we have. We're 24/7 response. If the phone rings in the middle of the night, you know, within a short period of time, we need to be able to start turning around products to support that response, okay? So when I talk about science, I'm really specifically talking about response science. It's not academic science, let's go study it for 2 years, okay? That's other people do that, and we take and learn from those lessons. But the science that we focus on is the immediate science that needs to be told, okay? Where's the oil gonna go in an hour, in 2 hours, tomorrow? Okay, what are we gonna do to clean it up today? Those kinds of things. I always say, you know, I'm always standing next to the best looking Coast Guard person out there, so I can get our attention. No, but we're in the field, we're working directly with those folks. We're on the command staff, the SSC is working directly in support of that federal on-scene coordinator, okay, to give them good support for the decisions that they make. But we also have teams that are spread out throughout the response, depending on the scale and the needs of the incident. Some of the products that we provide, you know, if we're doing a trajectory, where's the oil going to go? Well, we also want to be the people on the helicopter that's going out and calibrate. Where is the oil today? Okay. We want to have informed science. We want to be making good observations in the field, and that will either be with us or with our contractors or our partners. And this is kind of going into detail about SCAT, which is our shoreline cleanup assessment technique teams. Okay, and this is all about going out and determining where the oil is, which cleanup techniques are appropriate, and a systematic way of doing that. And we'll get into cleanup recommendations. Everything is going to computers now, and what we will want real-time information of where are things in the response, where is cleanup taking place, where is the oil. We do a lot of that. We have this IRMA system, which is operational. It's designed to ingest all of the data from the incident so that we have a display of that information. Those are just some trajectory maps. These are our weathering tools so we can determine how oil is changing over time. And then just some more tools associated with chemical spills, because we don't just do oil. And those are those, I won't get into that. More tools, more products. This is with regards to resources at risk. So when we're not doing response, and I know I'm over time, so I'm gonna wrap it up. When we're not doing response, what we're doing is we're preparing for response. And that's training, that's planning, okay? That planning effort that Mike talked about, we're very intricately involved in. We're mapping where those biological resources are, okay? So that we have an understanding of, what's going to get hurt during an oil spill. We can take actions early on to protect more sensitive environments, things of that nature. All of these can be accessed through our digital systems. And then, that's just what I just said. We do a little bit of research. We're doing a lot more research now that there's more money out there. The chief scientist for ORNR is involved in, science. A lot of it's being funded by Bessie these days. And then we do a lot of training. We train about 1,000 to 2,000 folks a year. All of the information that we synthesized over the years, we've tried to condense and put in usable forms. And that will be job aids, manuals, whether it's specific to oil spills in marshes, oil spills in sea turtles, how we do our oil observations from helicopters, SCAT, all of that kind of stuff. And those can be found on our website. I mentioned the training. Those are just some new products that we've put out recently. Aloha, GNOME is our trajectory model. And all of this information can be obtained from our website, which is, if you just Google response restoration NOAA, it'll get you there. It's all there. So those are the web resources. We think it's a good website. There's also a blog that we put out. We encourage people to get on that and understand what it is that we do and how we can support you during the response. With that,